Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Two Blokes podcast. Today, myself, the tall lady, and Dead Duck will be discussing the issues surrounding transgendered people, the activism and advocacy from every side of the issue, and the fact that these people have already been through so much only to become a political and social football for others. Pull up a stump and join us. And Dead Duck, I think I'm going to turn this over to you to start with. So
Rightio. Rightio.
let her go.
Right. So this whole discussion, I know people are really noticing it, is only taking into account trans women. So these are sort of biological men who become women. And there's an awful lot of nonsense and everything else around the whole discussion. But the whole thing that's going on societally wise at the moment is actually based in misandry, not, as most people like to tell you, in misogyny. Because when we hear about not wanting trans women in women only spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms and what have you, it's because they're dangerous or potentially dangerous. They, are basically sexual deviants. And also, this whole argument has gone, I don't know if it's a 180 from the argument a few years ago regarding biological sex and the differences between men and women, blah 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 blah, or if it's more of a 90-degree turn. But we've certainly taken a turn, and the whole thing, we've really gone so far down the rabbit hole now that there is no turning back. We can't go back, take back a lot of the stuff that has been said, make changes, and try again. We've long gone past that now. So I think what I'd like us to talk about today is what solutions there are, why the discussion is so polarized. Obviously, you've mentioned the activism or the activists on all sides of this argument. Um, Maybe where the men's rights movement needs to set up its stall. And yeah, there are solutions to the problems, but unfortunately, the solutions are going to be worse than the problems themselves. And I think that needs to be talked about. I briefly mentioned it last week in a different chat that we had, because with things like the bathrooms, I can only really see a couple of ways out, and it's ultimately going to come back on the trans women in particular, and it's not going to affect them in a positive light. So, yeah, that's where I want to try and take things today, guys, if we can. Taz, tall lady, I'll open the floor.
All right. Well, um, knowing some of the affected demographic personally, what I've seen, and this is something that I have also seen back when, the gay marriage controversy was still on fire. What I saw was what a lot of people who are radicals, they call it beautiful trouble. Okay? You've heard me say before that the end point of this for their purposes is not any resolution of the affected demographics issues. It's more instability and more controversy, more polarization, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and it's to a particular end. It has nothing to do with the life progress of gay people or transgendered people or people of color, or immigrants or working class people. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with power. Okay? And in order to wrest power from those that have it now, they need to destabilize and polarize those that they have power over. Okay. And this is just, among the latest in a long line of disruptive practices, that cause people to, like I say, to be adversaries when the reality is they have no business being adversaries. Okay, it provides them nothing nothing positive and nothing sustainable in their own life. Okay? When it comes to things like sports and private spaces, sex segregated spaces, it's really easy to set it up in such a way that people will start to pick sides, right? And people who are uncomfortable picking a side can be easily dismissed or swept away, because they're not picking a side. I know that from personal experience because I'm one of them. I only want to see reason, common ground, and a workable, sustainable solution to whatever the problem is. And in all of the popular rhetoric, what I don't see is anything like a workable solution. What I do see, is a lot of deliberate attempts to keep the controversy going. Whenever I see anything like that, I always wonder, okay, who's getting paid? Who is benefiting from this controversy? And in this case especially, there is a lot of benefit being accrued to both sides of this. When I think of a lot of the trans activists that basically want to dismiss the concerns of biological women, regardless of what they are. Again, big pain points like private spaces and reproductive justice and sports, and just personal ambitions in general. That the people promoting that, right, they seem to be doing very well, right? Even if they themselves are not transgender in any way, right? Just keeping the ball rolling seems to be getting them lots of attention, lots of clicks, lots of influence, mention, and my guess would be probably lots of money. It's one of those things, I can't prove it, but they wouldn't be putting forth that much effort to the exclusion of other things they could be doing unless somebody was putting food on the table. And then I think of the affected demographic. Again, I know some of them personally. They only want to live their lives, and they only want to exist, as they say, right, in such a way that they don't cause trouble and that they're allowed to flourish, right? That's not unreasonable, but their situation means that considerations and accommodations have to be made, right? I don't hear the activists from any side of this bringing that up, but I do hear it. I do hear it from other people, that either are directly involved because they're transgender, or they're just generally concerned with people's well-being. And I noticed that their ability to be heard, and their ability and our ability to be allowed to speak and to make a case to just fix this problem doesn't get a lot of play. It's out there, but it doesn't get the kind of clicks and numbers and discussion, that Matt Walsh does, right? Or Michael Knowles, or Ben Shapiro, or Demon Mama, or Vaush, right? Those people don't seem to be concerned with creating a solution to this problem. I don't hear them talk about that. When they're pressed, they start talking about, like demolishing capitalism, right? You guys know, I have no problem with that. I mean, it's dying anyway, you know. But as far as the particulars go, it's like in order to get there, we do this, and this. They kind of come back with, well, that'll, on the left, they're like, that'll resolve itself once we have the socialist utopia, and on the other side, they say, well, once we put things back, in their proper order, God Almighty will make sure that everything will be okay. And I'm like, if you guys could give me any, like, draw me a map, explain it like I'm five, because I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And whenever I get to that point, I think, yeah, they don't really have a solution. They're just making bank. So, like I said, you know, knowing the people that I do that are directly affected by this, and not only them, they themselves, but people that just plain care about them, because they're actual human beings. Um, they get nothing, they don't even get to be heard. And at some point, they don't want to be, because they know that anything they have to say about it is immediately going to be absconded with and exploited by, these two opposing provocateur groups. And like I said, whenever I see that happen, doesn't matter what the contention is, I always I have got to the point where I just assume somebody's making a buck, and somebody is gaining power, and it's not them. It's not the people who are affected by it, and it's not the people that are, afraid of what will happen, if these people get what they're asking for. Right? They get nothing. Right? They get nothing. They get yelled at. They get spit on. They get stuff thrown at them. But they don't get attention, and they don't get clicks, and they don't get money. They get nothing. And whenever, like I said, whenever I see that, I'm like, it's time for folks like us to say, there needs to be a place for this to be discussed, and for these people to be welcome, right? And to be supported, where we make it clear to them and we demonstrate that we're not doing it for our own purposes. We're doing it because it needs to be done, and it needs to be done soon. Right. So that's my take on it. Tall lady, what do you think?
Uh, well, I just feel like the Duck's point where it's this sort of one-sided situation, gender-wise. It's just there's such a focus right now on these kind of issues, and it's sort of in a way where it's how to best explain this. Why they were not heard before in a sense, but they had much more respect and listening ears, if that's really the best way to put it, towards the situation with the trans movement. In a sense that it seemed like people were not as affected negatively or did not view it as negative a bit in the past. And it's sort of the situation where we've sort of been like introduced to so many new things around the gender realm. And although it's great to see people opening and being themselves or figuring things out, it's also creating sort of confusion in some people. And I know a lot of people point out, well, this confusion sounds gender dysphoria and things like that. But the lengths of which some of these people are going to for certain liberties is being a bit harmful. First of all, we have this situation that Doug had brought up where it's like misandry in a sense, because like we don't really see debates about trans men or getting rid of them. It's mainly towards trans women because they transformed from male to female, and that's really sort of the guiding thing in this, this trying to put them in women's spaces. And we got this situation where it's like, well, women have been trying to recommend spaces forever, and now this is happening, and you know, no one. I've heard arguments for like just having their own space, and it doesn't really seem like too many of them are against just having their own space. And there's all these pushes towards like surgeries and medical procedures and mental procedures, which are very concerning and have been rising with this debate. And people haven't really thought about how permanent that is sometimes. And it's just very hard because I think this was mentioned by Ma last week, it's sort of the situation where we're seeing people becoming transphobic from this whole reverse wokeism thing, and the trans movement itself is just so fractured. You've got individuals who aren't even part of it or trying to push policies that are pretty harmful. You have some trans folks themselves. Some of them genuinely are like confused or mental health issues, and they don't really know what to do because it's like there are some things you can do that have permanent repercussions, and yet they're being told and pushed towards that possibly. I'm sorry, guys. I'm struggling. Like this is honestly just a mess.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, one thing uh, that has been another pain point to say that I've seen just, completely exploited from every angle is, people below a certain age, being, I guess, identified as transgender, somebody, under the age of 18, really, who the question of whose responsibility is it to determine what to do about that, has been left in the hands of, the people that are least qualified to even think clearly about it. you know Everything that all of them are doing and talking about, when it comes to, how to address transgendered people who are minors, is, it's all being left in the hands of people who do everything uh, out of fear, or at least the performance of fear, right? Parents and groups of parents are acting out of the fear that someone else is going to, abduct and mutilate their child, right? Either psychologically or physically or both, right? And from the other side of it, groups like teachers, and social groups are acting out of fear that these children are going to end up killing themselves if their parents, don't just move forward quickly with a life altering process. Beginning with, and they all say we want to begin with social transitioning, basically just starting to present this minor, as the opposite sex of that which they were, born into. And then after that, things like puberty blockers, and ultimately hormone replacement therapy, and expensive elective surgery, right? And we're talking about, if it's someone starting this out at the age of 15, between that and like the age of 25, they're just going to be, completely exposed to a hostile environment, from every angle. And, for some, it's like puberty's rough for everybody anyway, and under those circumstances, which of these solutions is most likely to not result in, this child killing themselves or disappearing, like running away and ending up on the street. They're just like a laundry list of bad things that can happen to somebody under those conditions. Public scrutiny and ostracizing, right? From one angle or the other, right? And like I said, it seems to me that the people being heard the most about this don't really want that to stop. They don't really want an end to that. Right? And, so until that part gets straightened out, for the transgender males and females that I know personally, I just say to them, spend as much time as you possibly can not involved with that, because it's a dead end. It won't serve you, right? And I say the reason I say that is because look what happens to the people, in your situation that do try to do something about it. And that sucks. I mean, that's not very much of an answer, right?
Yeah.
But that's all there is. Their other alternative is to, hop on one train or the other and just ride it until it goes off the cliff. Right. That's, that's not much of a choice.
No, I've got my thoughts on transitioning children. I certainly don't think anything should be done until a thorough evaluation by someone who's trained to look at this has been done, because you don't want to have children making those kinds of decisions. I mean, we don't allow children, for example, to smoke cigarettes, to buy alcohol, drink alcohol, to engage in sexual activity of any kind, shape, or form, to vote, serve in the military, and all these things, drive a car. So why would we allow them to make a decision about their lives, which is so
drastic?
Profound, drastic, and could go absolutely catastrophically wrong. It's not unheard of for there to be detransitioners,
right?
And in particular, make any kind of major surgery in the name of transition, you can't reverse. You can't give a trans man, for example, back their breasts.
Right.
You physically cannot do that. And so if a person undergoes that kind of surgery and then later regrets it, or I have seen commentary around detransitioners, which is that they feel let down by the medical professions because they didn't do their due diligence.
Right.
And make sure that this was absolutely the right thing to do. And we spoke, didn't we, very briefly before we started the show, that there are people within the trans community where it is blindingly obvious when you see them living their life as a trans person that they were born into the wrong body.
Yeah.
The most famous example that I can think of is Blair White. You look at Blair White, and if you didn't know she was trans, you would think that was a woman.
Yep.
Biological woman.
Yeah. I mean, she has to remind people, even now, that I was born a guy,
Yeah.
But like even the least intrusive and most easily reversible of all of these processes, and the most preliminary is puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are even prescribed, and it's just medication, and it's even prescribed to postpone what they call precocious puberty, where it just happens too soon. It's not a transgender issue. It's just like, a 9-year-old that's already developing. It's like you want to put the brakes on that if you can. But there's even with that, there's a certain, window of opportunity to make it, effectively reversible, right? You can't stay on them forever.
Yeah.
And regarding hormone replacement therapy, once it's started, and like fully in effect, the understanding is, this person is going to be sterile, right? They won't be able to reproduce through normal means. Now, for an adult to make that call, you guys both know, I made that call, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm good with it. Now, I didn't have to do none of that stuff. It was a simple 25-minute in-office procedure, and I'm good to go. Right.
Yeah.
But then again, I wasn't trying to change my gender, and I wasn't trying to change my sexual identity. I just wanted to be sterile.
Yeah.
So, you know, um,
It's
but I
different.
was, I was in my 40s, right?
Yeah.
And it was pretty clear that, I'm not the kind of fella that wants to reproduce,
Yeah.
and so, but it wasn't, there was nothing political about it, right?
Yeah.
And there was nothing, socially objectionable about it,
Yeah.
right? The most I ever got told was, not all the doctors who do that will do it for you if you've never had kids. And that's true. I mean, some will just, refuse the procedure because they want everybody to have kids. I don't know, but but you see what I mean? This is a real anodyne and uh you know in inoffensive, but life altering procedure,
Yeah.
and nobody talks about vasectomies. Nobody, you
Yeah.
know. But again, when I look at who is talking about it and why they're interested, I always it's like, what is the real motive here? Why are they why are they saying what they're saying? Why are they doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
And even Blair, she went through a period where, it was kind of clear that she was doing what she was doing because it was, profitable one way or another. Now, of course, she learned the hard way that that's not always a wise long-term business strategy, and so now she doesn't really do that anymore. But again, it's that, I guess, motivation is very seductive, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to just stand up and say, I am not gonna dip my toe in that well because it's too poisonous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that conversation with these people that I know personally. It's like, I'm not telling you not to get involved, and I'm not telling you not to be an activist one way or another. What I am telling you is it's not for free.
Yeah.
When you do that, they will take things from you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you can take that to the bank, because
Yeah.
they whatever they're doing, they won't be doing it for your benefit. They will be doing it for themselves.
Yeah.
And
And the other
it's
thing,
kind of like all of those things that I just outlined. Those are some of the most adult and, not for kids type discussions I can think of. Right.
yes. Yeah.
How would I propose any of what I just said to a 14, 15-year-old male, who's like confused and distraught about their identity? you
Mm-hmm.
know what would they say, right? What?
Yeah. Yeah. The
So,
other part of the conversation around trans children is, what if there's been a case in Texas, it's ongoing. I don't know what really is going on with it at the moment, where you've got a mother who is saying that the child is, although born biologically male, is a girl, and makes the child live as a girl,
right.
and yet when the child goes to live with the father, the child lives as a boy. Right? How? And the courts I believe, at one point residing on with either parent. The
Yeah.
courts really couldn't make up their mind which way this should go. And the
Yeah.
child is young.
Hmm.
The child is 7, 8 years old. I mean, good
Right.
grief.
Right.
People talk jokingly about the things that they wanted to be when they were 7 or 8. You
Yeah.
know, I wanted to be a dog, or I wanted to be a horse, or I wanted to be a racing car, And for
Yeah.
all the tongue-in-cheek nature of those comments, it's very, very dangerous
Yeah.
to push a child in either direction
Yeah.
with this.
It
I,
is. It's very dangerous. It's very life altering.
yeah,
And, if the court system and the medical industry, the healthcare industry, if they were more consistent and more reliable, then the self-interested activists would have much less of a platform, because there would, it's like everyone could look at them and say, look, the between the courts and the healthcare system, they're working this out successfully so that these people end up okay.
yeah,
Now, my point is, it does happen sometimes, once in a while,
mm-hmm,
but something that life altering for somebody at that age is not good, to hang their hat on. It works sometimes, that's
no,
just not good enough, right?
it,
And and same thing with just leaving it with the parents, just and entirely unconsulted. Same problem. Sometimes it works out okay. Sometimes everybody does the right thing and things work out, but it's only sometimes, once in a
yeah,
while. And
yeah,
everybody is hanging from every angle. Everybody is hanging their hat on something that works out okay sometimes, and the rest of the time it just all goes to hell.
yeah.
And
We had,
they just shrug and say, ah, well, maybe next time.
yeah, it's the same with the discussion around things like circumcision on boys.
Mhm.
It's the same discussion essentially.
Mhm.
Why,
Yeah.
coming from the UK, coming from Europe, where we just don't do it, essentially,
Right. Right.
unless it's absolutely 110% necessary. We will not do this to a child
Mhm.
who's only a few days old. We don't see the point in it. And you see all the arguments about cleanliness and all that. It's complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
But leaving it up to the parents, and how many discussions have you seen with what they call regret mums,
Yeah.
who have a child, a son, circumcise the son, and then years later down the line start reading literature on circumcision and start really looking into it and realizing, hang on a minute, I've made an enormous mistake.
Yeah.
Why did I inflict this trauma on my child? And there was a really famous case, I can't remember the boy's name, where he was, pulled apart by this whole trans thing, and it ended up killing him.
Mhm.
And I've read stories of young men who have gone through circumcision and ended up killing themselves
Yeah.
because of the trauma of it all.
Yeah.
You've got to what? Unfortunately, there's no right answer with this, really,
No.
because the
Well,
tra-
I'll say this: there's not an easy right answer.
no, there isn't.
Yeah.
I The trans activists will say, well, you're putting this child's life at risk because you will not allow them to transition when they want to. And
Right.
then you've got the people on the other side that are saying, well, yeah, okay. They're saying now that they want to transition. Where are they going to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time?
Oh,
Are they going to want to live their lives in the way that they altered it at this age?
right. Yeah,
And
that kind of, predicting the
oh,
future
yeah,
of somebody else, again, uh,
ugh,
it's the path of least resistance, especially for parents, and use circumcision as an example. I'm circumcised. In my case, it was uh mostly not even under consideration. what impact will this have? This was, back in 1961, right? But the thing is, there's between 1961 and now, there there has been a lot of talk about, uh, the moral rightness and the, medical and social efficacy of circumcision. The consensus, right, among people that think about it, is that, well, at the very least, doing this is not having the effect that we thought it would, and it's caused a lot of trouble, but I guess the silver lining is that, the fact that was done to me, right? And I didn't kill myself, and I didn't. I tried my best not to allow it to, interfere with my sex life. Means that, I can look at the other side of it now and say, this should not have been done to me, right?
Yeah.
It was a bad idea, right? And here's why, and I can be all calm and rational and just say, look, if this wasn't done to me, my life would have been better in the following ways. What I can't do is prove it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't go back in time and undo that.
No.
And like I say, to make that kind of decision on my behalf without giving it at least that much thought, even the doctor that performed the procedure, it's like, what would that person say to me now?
Yeah.
If I just sat down with them, had a cup of coffee and said, look, it wasn't the end of the world, but I really wish to hell you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
Then what's he going to say? But you see what I mean? A lot of this is, there is no, redress for the past. And for the people that are transitioning, I mean, not that young, but pretty young, some of what is done is irrevocable, right? And if they truly desist, right, and they don't kill themselves, right, and it's like best possible outcome, they don't commit suicide, they find a path to live their life, reasonably comfortably, and they're allowed to flourish, still have that nagging question, like to pose to the people that that supported it and encouraged it and insisted on it in some cases. Just look them in the face and say, I can show you why this was a bad idea and you shouldn't have done this to me, and I'm not going to waste time trying to prove it to you because it's my life, not yours, but you did do this. It was your idea much more than it was mine. Right. And even if it was mine, it was the idea of an immature and unformed mind. Now I have to live with this. I'm living with it. I'm doing, whatever, doing okay, whatever the case may be. But, it should have been my call. And now there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Yeah. And that's the men's rights position for the most part on circumcision, isn't it? It's not a case of don't do it. It's a case of do it at an age in which you can be informed and B, consent.
Right.
And you could consent in the strongest possible terms.
Right. Yeah. Circumcision, and I hate to, keep bringing it back to that just because it seems so, the perception is that it's so minor in comparison with transition procedures. But the simple reality is that, as an adult, right, an adult male, once you go through puberty and everything is fully formed and, whatever have you, There's doing a circumcision under those conditions more difficult and more painful and requires more recovery. In other words, it's a bigger deal, you know.
Hmm.
And what I hear back, you know, from men who've had it as adults and men that are thinking about doing it as adults, what I hear back from them is that's okay, you know.
Mm.
I mean, it means that much to me that it's my call,
Yeah.
right? You know, that I'm willing to put up with. It's more expensive too, by the way, because like I say, because it's a bigger deal, you know. And like, yeah, no, no problem, you know,
Mm.
because I want it to be my decision,
Yeah.
you know, and that just kind of points to the, uh, I guess, primacy, you know, the criticality of, you know, people's own adult mature agency and autonomy.
Mm.
It whatever is whatever of those things is taken from them before they have their own agency and their own autonomy as adults. Okay, those things can never be given back,
Yeah.
regardless. You know,
Yeah. It's
and once it's like once it's gone, it's gone. You
yeah.
know, and whoever suffered that loss, you know, again, the choices are so stark and so simple. You know, either A, I, you know, I persevere and I get through this and I figure out how to, you know, how to live my life, or not,
Yeah.
you know.
I,
And the
I
or not is, you know, like I say, people are still treating suicide like it's just unthinkable. Like, no,
mm,
it's not. You know,
no.
unfortunately, it is no longer unthinkable. You
Yeah.
know, now it's like you have to be, you know, you have to present the activists and the, you know, supporters on all sides of this, look and say to them, look, you know, this idea of these people ending their life, you know, we better talk about that first before we talk about anything else.
Yeah.
Because if it's on the table for them, it's on the table for us too.
Yeah. Yeah. I with the idea of trans kids and parents arguing over whether or not the child is trans or whatever, or cis, which is another term I absolutely despise, by the way. That's right up there with toxic masculinity. I used to have arguments with my ex-wife and still have them occasionally now when it comes to deciding whether or not the kids carry on with their after school activities, football and karate and stuff. These aren't life changing decisions. And, I've always told her that the children will tell us whether or not they want to carry them on. It's our jobs as parents to say, okay, but then see, they can go back to those. It's not going to do them any harm to stop doing them and go back because they can go back.
Right.
If my son didn't want to play piano from however long he's done it now, and he wanted a break, no problem. He can go back and play the piano in his own time whenever he wants, for example. But when you start making not only physical changes but chemical changes to a person, those are nearly always irreversible. You can't do anything about it if
Right.
they then decide later on down the road that they didn't want to do that. That decision they made at 7, 8, 9, 15 years of age isn't what they want to decide on now. If
Yeah.
you see what, if you get what I
Yeah,
mean.
I do. I mean, it's you know, some uh ripples in a pond, you know, are small and they don't last very long. You
Yeah,
know, if you drop a big enough stone in the pond, the rippling kind of reinforces itself and it never really goes away. You
yeah,
know, and you know, like while you're talking and while I was thinking about this, you know, I think in a hypothetical, you know, a what if,
mm,
and like, you know, tall lady, you're a reasonable example of, you know, a recently adulted person, you know, like you're an adult and you've got, at least by the law and by the social order, you have as much agency and autonomy as one can have, which congratulations, you're going to love it. But think back, say 6 or 7 years in your own life, when you were not yet an adult, right? And you were still under, the care and protection of your family, et cetera, et cetera. And, the issue became critical that you needed to change your gender, and you didn't want to talk to anybody about it because of all the, hullabaloo that was going on even then, right? And you didn't want, you weren't going to just sit down and start talking about it with your friends or, the adults at school for the same reason, and I can imagine there would have been issues, trying to make that case to your family, right? But what if somewhere in you got the courage to do that and you started with your family? It's like, think about the nature of that conversation. How would it go? What would you have to say? What would they say back to you? These things happen every day now, and with families and with groups of friends and with, the adults at school and whatever have you, among people that, that they do have to, have that conversation. The same thing with just plain old being gay, that there's all this, kind of, I would just call it, perverse, visibility to something that, it happens between one person and, a group of people that care about them, and love them, or, are concerned for them, right? And, that one person at the age of 15 or 16 or whatever, has to sit down with that group of people and have, like I said, one of the most adult conversations I can think of, and to make anything out of it other than that, it means that the chances of good decisions being made are slim and none, by that person, by whatever group of people they're talking to, because everybody is going to be reacting, everybody's going to be acting and reacting out of fear, and out of anxiety, and pain, right?
Mhm.
And I wish that human beings were the type of creatures that could reliably make good decisions just out of fear, anxiety, and pain. But we're not. We suck at it, and we always have. We make the worst decisions when we're under that kind of duress. And like I said, the key to it, in my opinion, and just one man's opinion, but the key to it, in my opinion, is, to be able to enable that kind of talk and that kind of discussion with no fear, with no anxiety, and with no pain. And as always, my solution costs the most, is the most difficult, takes the longest, and is the hardest. But it's the only viable answer. Otherwise, the pain, fear, and anxiety, and all of the exploitation of it just continues on from now on. There is no other way. We can't. Those two things exclude each other mutually. They always have. It doesn't matter whether it's questions about homosexuality or transgender identity or race, or class differences. Every time there's an uproar about it, I can just sit back and look and see everybody here is acting out of either fear, greed, anxiety, or pain. and the chances of a good outcome, are about the same as me being abducted by aliens tomorrow. I'm not saying it can't happen. It's just not very likely.
I mean, I don't really know. I think parents should be kept. I don't want to say kept out of the conversation, but like as the duck had pointed, like they shouldn't be making these decisions. There shouldn't be court cases about whether a kid's trans or not or whatnot. Kids will say what they say, and you let them experiment. I know people are like, well, kids are saying at 8 years old. It's like, okay, well, if they're saying at 8 years old, don't make a permanent decision. Let them figure it out because they're still trying to figure out what it is, probably. And it's like it's the conversations you need to have is trying to explain these things and understand them and like yeah, I think that's really the best way to put it is just needing to have conversations where you explain things and not I know that's hard to say, but like and not in a biased sort of way. I like trying to think the best way to word this because you said that and the first thing that came to my mind was like I worked as a camp counselor for a while and I was just sort of astounded by the fact that all these kids they were asking questions on what would be, I guess, considered sort of adult subjects. About racial disparities. They're asking about what prostitutes are and things like that. And they would hear their parents mention it, and then their parents wouldn't want to talk about it. And so they try to ask us, and well, as the counselors who would like to keep our jobs and get paid, we didn't want to explain that.
Yeah.
Especially because the camp I worked at had its own issues too. So I was already on a short thread, not for being a bad person, just for certain biases by certain managerial positions. So I really, really didn't feel like having to deal with those. But, that caused a really big issue for us because people don't seem to realize that in today's world, a lot of kids, I don't want to say they don't have a childhood, but, their childhood's so different because they're being made so much more aware of so many topics early on.
Yeah.
I remember I didn't hear about LGBTQ too much until I think 8th or 7th grade.
Can you just explain that in terms of age for me? Because obviously I don't understand how that works.
About 14.
Okay, cheers.
So about 14, yeah, about 14 is when I was first hearing about like LGBTQ and straight alliance and things like that. They didn't really tell us about sex until high school, which was like freshman year, which would have been like 15. We didn't really hear, we had always known about racial disparities growing up in minority communities, and they did explain to us that sometimes there are biases, but there was no real big push about keeping your own community or, this white privilege. None of those ideas really came about. So I think my junior year of high school, maybe, which was like 16, 17. So these were things that didn't come about till I was like almost an adult, almost a legal adult by the American definition, I should say. But I've got a younger sibling who has friends who already at this camp I was working with kids in the age range of 9 to 14. And it was the 9 and 10-year-olds that I ended up having to spend most of the time with sitting down and trying to find a way to talk to them about, no, that's not racist. Yes, that like,
yeah.
What are okay words to say? What aren't? What drag queens were. I didn't want to explain this stuff, but I didn't know what else to do because their parents would talk about it or complain about it. They asked me about politics. I was asked if I was a Democrat or a Republican by a 9-year-old. I was like, excuse me?
Well, the irony is that they'll, at that age, ask that kind of question just because, so far in their life, there's been nothing, telling them they should not ask such questions, right? They're the ignorant party. It's not their fault. They just haven't lived long enough yet. But I mean, fortunately for those camp kids. They were in the hands of somebody that at least pauses for a moment before just blurting something out. I mean, you probably handled it well ahead of the curve, right? Under difficult circumstances. But like I said, and this expands out to social programs for kids, educational programs for kids, and again, the healthcare and legal system. It is too often in the hands of people, that don't do that. They act they act in a way that is selfish and at the same time unself-aware. They don't know why they're acting the way they are. They just are, and they are afraid that if they don't act that way, and if they don't respond to the kid this way, that something bad will happen, right? And to take it back to parents, a parent that still remembers what it's like to be that age is still going to have to contend, with a very different world than the one that they were that age in, and with much different opposing and tangential influences. When I was growing up, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was none of that stuff. There was the schoolyard, right? So I probably asked a lot of questions. It's just that they were not very well informed. So I wasn't that hard to deal with, right? I wasn't that hard to respond to, and usually it was not that hard for me to accept whatever I was told. It was palatable. I could live with it. Even under the conditions I was under, it was okay. But now it's not like that. And as far as I can tell, it's never going to be that way again. And like when I say that in among certain groups of people and like much older, like around my age, then what I start hearing back is, all this nostalgia and about the good old days and regret about the way things are right now. And to that, I always have to say, the way things are right now is the way things are right now, and the way of things that you're talking about is gone now and from now on. There is no, return of the good old days, right?
Yeah.
And the good old days came with enough problems that we don't have them anymore. And there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
As usual, and again, I blame my own generation for this as much as anybody, we weren't really as happy with the good old days as you guys are, talking about right now. But instead of really resolving those problems, what we did was exchange them for another set of problems and then handed those problems off, to the two generations to come, now three, instead of actually fixing them. So, I'm not tolerant of any discussion about, return to the good old days, because they were never there, and that's why we have these days.
Yeah.
If everything was just like chef kiss perfect back then, it would still be that way.
Yeah.
And clearly that's not the case. It isn't that we discarded the old ways. That's not the problem. The problem is that we replace the old ways with these ways, and these ways suck.
Yeah.
I don't want to be rude, Les, but I'm gonna be honest. That was one of the things I really couldn't stand as a camp counselor was the good old days thing. Because that was next to my child's an angel. They would never. That was the second thing I couldn't stand because a lot of these kids got picked up by parents and grandparents were like, oh, well, this and this and this happened. They're like, I don't understand this generation. When I was their age, in the good old days, and they talk about all this nostalgia, and like even older folks, and I'm gonna be honest about it, a little bit my own parents sometimes. I get really tired when they say the good old days. I'm like, do you ever realize that you thinking about the good old days makes you hate the modern age so much that when we try to point out the few good things, all you do is act negative about it? Because you're so
Yeah,
stuck in the good old days in your dang head, and
yeah,
then
Yeah.
you don't feel like talking about like the issues the way we should be talking about them, trying to be more understanding. You
Yeah. Well, the
just
good
get
old.
immediately defensive. That's the problem with these parents too. They're like, their kids would have like an issue, and we're just like, hey, your kids did that, and they were like, oh my god, I don't understand kids today where they're getting this stuff. And back in my day, we didn't have this thing. And I'm like, well, you need to get over back in your day and get in your kid's age and start talking about this, because I don't like getting yelled at for the fact I got to teach your kid, but you don't feel like teaching your kid. And then we end up in a situation where they're coming to camp every day saying the
Yeah.
same stuff.
The good old days when black people weren't considered human beings.
yeah.
Gay men were locked up simply for indulging their base instincts and everything
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
think
wasn't allowed to exist
yeah,
because
Right.
I don't. I think I'll
racism
take a
of
pass.
America.
Don't get me wrong. There's things, the respect for your elders and all that sort of stuff, which I think is sadly lacking today. And that kind of thing was probably better in the good old days, as it were. I'm sure you were probably taught, Les, respect for your elders when you come across
Mhm.
them, which
Mhm.
is maybe not something that's taught as much today. And
Right.
as a man, you were probably taught how to shake somebody's hand, for example.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but obviously we're getting off topic here.
Well, yes and no, because and by the way, I always enjoy a rant by tall lady.
Oh my
But
god.
but the I guess missed opportunity and failed responsibility, to make sense of and promote the, I guess, advantages of those things about the good old days that were actually good.
mm,
Again, that rests with us, because how can I, you know, how can I promote the uh like overall good and the overall stability from simple things like respecting your elders, and for young men to be able to look others in the eye and shake their hand. I mean, these are really simple things,
mm,
but there's we had a chance back then to outline and clarify why those things are good and why they
mm,
work well, right?
mm.
But we didn't do that.
Yeah,
Instead we just chucked the whole thing,
yeah,
right, and said, well, none of it's a good idea, right? And so there's this and again, tall lady, this goes back to the parents you had to deal with, just all this like residual bitterness and feeling of being robbed, right? That comes from these parents that never gave the idea a thought, when they would have had a chance to show why it matters.
mm,
I mean, they just said, well, that's over with, so moving on, right?
yeah,
And
Yeah.
now, for somebody like tall lady, the blowback is that, oh yeah, um these kids that the camp counselor is counseling aren't living in a world where things like that get any support or any play, right? It would be meaningless if tall lady had taught these kids uh things like respect for their elders, or shaking hands, or any of that stuff. what would they be able to do with it? They're they're in a social order that no longer recognizes that stuff. So now poor tall lady has to come up with, like a different narrative and a different response to this kid, that doesn't understand why respecting, older people even matters. You know what I mean? And in that environment, bringing it back to the topic, again, some of the discussions, that have to happen, right? They just do, right? They're happening in an environment, that is just completely, set up for it to fail, right? One way or another. And like I said, I'm not saying that it never works, right? It does work sometimes, and it's still, a pretty high cost in money and time and emotional pain all around, but people do get it to work, just not very often,
Yeah, it's not.
and and if you can't say, well, it works most of the time, then it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
I think going back to the trans thing, like that was nobody ended up bringing up the camp, which I'm sorry to say, but thank heavens. I already had enough complicated conversation with 9-year-olds. I did not think I ever had to have. But going back to when we were talking about earlier, we talked about parents fighting about stuff and you brought up your kids. It's one of those things where it's another one of those things where parents need to explain it. They need to find an unbiased way. I mean, I hate to put it this way. I don't care what your bias or your opinion or your religion is. Educate yourself, please, and then explain it to your children in an unbiased way, and your kids will figure it out from there. And then, and don't push things. If I see these cases where it's like mom, dad, 8-year-old claims they're trans. I'm like, and the mom's trying to take them to like California for surgery. I'm like, well, now do the kids say they want the surgery? Or do they just say they're trans, but they maybe need to discover that out a little? Like, now you're just turning it into an issue and never just had these. The whole world is just pushing issues that really don't need to be pushed. I'm sorry. Like, it's simple. If they want it, they want it. If they don't, they don't.
Yeah.
And if they don't know, or it's pretty obvious that they're too young to really fully understand it, then don't push anything. Just sort of, don't have them do it. Just, let them socially figure stuff out because you are socially confusing them. And parents and grandparents who are not socially, because we had grandparents pick up kids too. And oh my God, grandparents are even worse. No offense, Les. Your generation with the no color TV. Back in my day, there was no color TV. Just pick up your grandkid, please. And they spoil them. That's the worst part. I had a kid who was basically raised by his grandparents. He looked me in the face when I took away his phone and said, I could sue you. These grandparents, because they're even more old and traditional. So they're even more not having this conversation. They're like, nope, not in my category of things. I'm just going to spoil you as a way of trying to ignore this topic.
Yeah. Tall lady, you're just talking about, letting your kids figure this stuff out for themselves. My daughter has come out to me as being gay. Now, my daughter is not even yet 13. So my stance on it is, okay, let's see where you are in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. If you start bringing girls home, then I'm going to know that this is real. And therefore, it's your life. You go and live it however you want. But I'm neither going to push, promote, nor condemn what she has said to me. I'm going to continue to love her. I'm going to continue to support her. And if things change down the road and she says maybe she likes boys and girls, or actually she just likes boys, then so be it. I can deal with it from there. But I'm not going to start making decisions for her because of something that she said to me as a young child or youngish child. Barely old enough, really, barely old enough to wipe her own backside, let alone anything else. So,
and sometimes they don't even know that. I had a friend who I have multiple friends who are LGBTQ, and some of them didn't know. I had one friend who is now is a he, and it was an unbelievably interesting journey going from a she who was queer, a she who is lesbian, a she who is bisexual, a he who is gay, or no, he was gay, and now a he who is straight.
Mm.
You know, I had another friend who used to think they were gay and then bi, and now they're engaged to probably the most wonderful girl I've ever met. So
Yeah, I mean,
and they made these decisions in high school, and they didn't start making their points of where they are now until we were adults. Like we're in college, and there's still sometimes like, oh,
yeah, yeah. It's why we said earlier on, we shouldn't be making decisions for children which are permanent. We shouldn't be making decisions for our children, full stop. We should let them discover their true identity for themselves as they age.
Yeah,
And if if you have a child who says that they are trans, and it gets to the stage where that's all, that's what they're saying, then don't go making any medical changes to them. But certainly you can make social changes for them, and allow them to live how they want. And then if they get to the age of 18, 19 years of age, they're an adult in most most countries in the world. Therefore, they have the legal rights to make decisions about their own bodies going forwards. And so,
okay, sorry, this is off topic, but is there a part of the world where 18 is at the adult age?
not that I can think of, but
no, not fully adult. In the US, you can vote and be and are eligible for selective service if you're male at 18, but the drinking age and most, like contract law and so forth, I believe is at least restricted, to be mostly 21. But a couple of things really quick. I accidentally failed to invite Mao, but I have just sent Mao an invite, so hopefully will be joining us here shortly, because I think Mao's voice is probably pretty welcome here. But in any case, while listening to you, tall lady, as like I said, as a recently adulted person, and listening to you, Dead Duck, as a father, what I'm hearing from tall lady, is the sudden probably importance of feeling genuinely supported and well advised, like well prepared to be out in the world. That it's like, now that you're out in the world, you probably are feeling like, well, hope I'm ready for this, because I don't know, and with you, Dead Duck, that it's even with what your daughter came to you with, and just your experience with them, is that you want to make sure that they feel supported and that they're well prepared, but that is what is there. But what isn't there is fear, and anxiety about about the decisions and the like, as you said, the experiments that they're going to go through, that it's going to happen because it's going to happen, and the best thing to do is make sure that they're ready, and when I guess when I hear about it from others that don't seem to put much value on those two things, supporting and preparing, what I see is fear, right? What I see is anxiety and defensiveness, and I'm like, for the kid, right, you know, does that get them ready to not be under your care anymore?
No,
You know,
good
one
grief.
way, yeah, one way or another. Now, here in the cold light of day, while we're sitting here just talking about this, and from my, lofty and distant perch, I look at that and I say, well, how could you be prepared? I'm not saying it never works, right?
Mm.
It's just that it's so seldom as not to be worth considering,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, and when it does work, it seems to mostly work by accident, just by serendipity. Things happen the right way in the right order, and everything's okay.
Yeah.
But you want to bank somebody's life on that? You want to bank any chance at well-being and flourishing on that? So one thing I know about parents is that they are all very into, the flourishing and happiness of their kids. So if that's the project, then again, one man's opinion who's never been a parent, but from my perspective, if that's the project, you want to go with what works. I mean, you want to go with something that's got a track record, and when it comes to preventing regret and preventing pain and suffering, yeah, but also a life of fear and limitation, and victimhood, et cetera, and so forth. If you want to prevent that, you go with what works. You go with you look at all of the different ways people raise their offspring and say which ones come out of it most often with their head out of their butt, and not afraid of their own shadow and able to function, and get what they want out of life. Some of these things don't work and others do. Pick one.
Yeah. It's often it's the children that have had parents that have been supportive and neither pushed nor held the children back. Because the children are given the freedom to make mistakes, but are also prevented from making catastrophic mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's your job as a parent, essentially, is to allow your children to get it wrong, but not get it wrong in a way which is going to potentially, well, ultimately end their lives. And so, this is why, I talk about my daughter's personal preferences and what have you. I've said to my ex-wife, look, I'm not going to make any judgment either way on this. I'm just going to see where this comes out when she's an adult. And then if she tells me that she is definitely a lesbian, definitely gay, then fine. So what? Your life, girl. You go live it. To a certain degree, I rest easy knowing that she's probably not going to bring me grandchildren. I mean that half humorously, but by the same token, it'd be a little bit sad. I'm not going to possibly have grandchildren from her, but it's whatever. It's going to be her life, and
right.
But you've got to protect your children. You've got to look after them, and your children or parents of potentially trans children. Your job is to not push this idea that they're trans and not cultivate it, but also not kill it.
Right.
It's to let the child grow, and as they get older, they start reaching adulthood. If they change, they change. If they don't, then you have to be supportive of that life that they are going to go on and lead, and hope that no matter how they present themselves to the world aesthetically, let's say, that the moral lessons that you have taught them, the good moral lessons now, remain with them, because then you've done your job. You can kick back in your lawn chair and relax because you've done your bit. Your children are going to be fine. I think obviously the whole trans thing isn't going to go away. I mean, trans people have always existed. They are just more visible today, and I hope I don't mind if I don't know if you guys mind if we maybe sort of move away from the trans children side of things for a minute. and go on to discuss trans people in society and how we get past the barriers that are currently being put up. I think the discussions around sport is smoke and mirrors at the end of the day. I mean, anyone with two working brain cells would not want, a biological man in a combat sport, for example, with a biological woman. I think that's a stupid idea, obviously. But we briefly, I think Tall Lady briefly mentioned it. There's been this push for decades to have women in men's spaces because without doing that, it's misogynistic and everything else. And here we're now, one of the discussion points is having biological males in women's spaces. And I remember having a conversation with a Girl Guides leader at the Royal Welsh Farming Show a few years back. And I was discussing this with her, the push to have girls in the Boy Scouts. And why was there no push to have boys in the Guides? Gender equality and all that. And the response was because the girls have to have a safe place. Okay, can you make that make any sense, anyone? Because I certainly can't.
That's to say that one demographic or cohort or another needs something. You know how just young people are in general. That just saying that rarely fills the bill. You can say, girls need a segregated safe space, because of this and this. But at the same time, here is why, and just tell them, here's why you being in that space would be a problem for them, but this is, this isn't the kind of thing that you wait until, the person is 30 years old, right? And, wait until they, impinge on one of those spaces and then throw a fit about it. Because then it's too late. For one thing, it already happened. For another thing, to one degree or another, that person, that did that, either A, didn't know the impact it was going to have, or B, if they did know the impact that it was going to have, they went into the world in such a state that they don't care. Right. So somebody screwed up something somewhere along the way. Right. But just to make it all about that person, as far as I'm concerned, I wish people were that accountable for themselves under any and all circumstances. But we just don't do that. Unless, like I said, and I use yourself as a good example, unless, they were sent out into the world as newly minted adults, prepared for the idea that they're, things they do are going to matter, right? Things they do are going to have an impact. And if they are unwise or dangerous or foolish things, that, expect the following to happen, right? And right now it's like, you don't the great thing about social media is that, you don't even have to come up with an essay. You can just pull up a YouTube video, I support my child, your decision to do X, Y, and Z, if you really want to do that. But if in doing all that, you pull a stunt like this, here's what's going to happen. And you can count on it, right? Because everybody's got a smartphone and everybody's got their cameras rolling 24/7. So, if you just like barge your way into a woman's dressing room at a spa, just assume that it's going to be worldwide in 20 minutes, because it will.
Yeah. The whole discussion around obviously the changing room and toilets thing, that's misandry. That whole discussion, that's all that is. Because the idea and the thinking is that a biological man going into that environment, if they are transgendered, is only doing it for their own sexual gratification,
Right.
which for the vast majority is utter nonsense.
Yep.
They're going into that environment because it's the place in which they feel most comfortable, or they are not just feel, they are most comfortable.
Yeah, they feel most comfortable and are the least threatened.
Yeah.
A good example of that is the utter failure of the prison system, to account for and accommodate transgender inmates. They put men in women's prisons now, and I'm told that they're, putting men in women's, putting women in men's prisons because that's how they were born. And it's like, there's all of this lambasting of the prison system because of it. And I ask myself, well, what did the prison system think was going to happen?
Well, yeah.
Did they just assume everything was going to be okay? Because that's stupid. I mean,
yeah,
that it's like they spent money, right? And they allocated resources and all of this specifically to look like morons. And then everybody interested in the subject at all made sure to make them look like morons.
yeah.
It's like, well, of course that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
an obvious
just really quick wanted to take a moment to welcome Mao. It's so good to see you, and thank you so much for joining us. My apologies for your late start. That was my fault, but it's good to see
It's okay.
Thank
yeah, no
you.
biggie. Like, well, at least I'm still here, which is what matters. I arrived.
That's
Yeah, I was
right.
worried because like I didn't know if there was going to be a podcast today, and I did have something to say about the topic. And I don't know if you guys already like covered this, but like my biggest focus is like when it comes to transactivism, and yeah, like that is for me like the biggest grip that I have. Again, I don't know if you guys already like talk about this, but I wanted to like express like my idea about it. And it's I don't like one key element, and that is the to me like transactivism really exploits like trans people, and especially like their vulnerabilities, because like from my personal experience I've seen trans people say that like for example words hurt them, and also like the implications that the ideas behind those words, you know. Not only that, but some of them they tie their whole identity like around their trans diagnosis. So, and any person that wants them to be happy and normal, they'll be telling them like the same thing we tell children, like that you're not supposed to allow words and concepts to have such a giant weight on your life, you know, in general. And for trans people, like the majority, even though I don't have a percentage or a big number, I am confident in saying that it is the majority. Like for the majority of them, validation is something they focus on, like to an obsessive degree, you know, which to me is inherently bad, no matter who does it. Like it doesn't matter like what type of person is like that is something bad that no one should do, you know, seeking like validation or making validation their identity. So and like the idea that like they can be that they can the idea that they're not gonna have a normal life until society sees them as the sex they're transitioning to become, like that is not healthy either, because like they're literally like putting their own mental state in the hands of everyone else, which to me like that is that has to be like one of the biggest reasons for the gigantic suicidality rate that they have. So yeah, that's like my main criticism, because like if people truly want them to be normal and happy, they will be destroying the idea of validation, destroying the idea of well, actually encouraging them to like never place any like weight on what other people believe or think, because that's actually going to make them happier in general, because
Yeah.
like giving them agency over their own like identity, instead of waiting for everyone else to validate them so they can be happy, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, and Mao, thank you so much for that. We did, or I did, bring that up, the activism part of it and the exploitation part of it. But I think you really hit the nail on the head, just mentioning the fallout to the individual person that comes from uh, activism demanding worldwide validation
Oh
to
yeah.
these individuals. Now, my experience with being validated, um, it's always been very individual, and it's always been very lack of a better term, intimate. It's been the result of being known and being seen, and I'll be honest with you, whether it's me or somebody who's struggling with gender identity, the last thing on earth that I want is, just a blank check of validation and unconditional acceptance from everybody in the social environment that we live in now. I would be looking for approval from vast numbers of people that have their head firmly up their butt.
yeah.
And I've had experience with that kind of thing. I've had experience with being, artificially and performatively validated and accepted by people that, I'll be honest with you, God love them, but they're incompetent and misinformed, and they never saw me, right? I mean, they never really knew who I was. They were accepting and validating some idea of me that popped into their little head, and it's like, that's not what I want, and it's not what I recommend for anybody that's struggling with, a lifelong issue, because it will screw you over every time.
Yeah.
Being, Mal, like you just said, being validated that way, by default, in the company of people who, frankly, I hate to be mean, but it's the kind of people I wouldn't have take out my garbage, because they would get lost on the way to the curb and steal the can. I don't want their
Oh yeah.
validation. I don't. I mean, God bless them. I'm sure their mom loves them, whatever. But, my my best long-term plan for me, and I would say also for people struggling with, gender identity or sexuality or any of it, is to not seek the support and approval of people who aren't qualified. They
Yeah.
don't know what they're doing, and God knows what they're going to say to you, and God knows what they're going to say about you, right? 'Cause that's another big thing, is you get the approval and the support of the wrong people, and the next thing you know, they're talking all kinds of crap about you, and you're not even there, to set the record straight.
That's
It
so true.
happens.
Like, not only that, like, I've noticed that it's a political ploy too. Because like one of the things that I've seen the trans activists do, like very subtly, is to imply to the trans people or the trans community, like, that we gave you validation, we gave you the identity, and we can take it away at any time if we want to. So you better do what we tell you and vote how we tell you and do what we tell you to do.
Right.
Otherwise, the consequences are gonna be we're gonna remove what we gave to you.
Right.
That's
Right.
incredibly abusive.
Yeah.
I mean,
From their
that-
point of view, it's theirs to give and take away. And there's all these strings attached to it. They said this, none of this is simple or easy, right? Mao, before you joined, we were talking about even conversations about coming out, as gay or transgender, right? Those are some of the most grown up and fraught and delicate conversations people can have, right? And they're the kind of conversation that follows a person, whether it's the person coming out or the person, being told. It's gonna matter, right? Now and from now on. And I don't want any of that in the hands of, like I said, people who, they're only in it for their own gain, because they will take advantage of it, they will exploit it, and they will give and take it away, at their own convenience for their own reasons. And I can't use that, and I think for anybody coming out again, as gay or non-binary or transgender, queer in any way, I would not want that in the hands of anybody that doesn't know me and doesn't have my best interest at heart, because just like I say, if it's just everybody else, then I'm at their mercy, right? Whatever it is they're going to say about me, whatever it is they're going to say to me, or, whatever they're going to give me or they're going to take from me, it's all in their hands. And, maybe I'm a little paranoid, but there's not that many people I trust with that kind of thing. I mean, I keep my profile reasonably public, but as far as expecting, as far as expecting any kind of positive return to me, when it comes to anything I say publicly, why should I expect that? Right. I'm saying what I'm saying, on behalf of the people who've got nobody validating them and got nobody supporting them with their own best interests at heart, because that's most of them. Mal, before you joined, I was talking about, people who I know personally that are queer or transgender or non-binary in any way. They're not, they're not activists in the way that we think of activism, and their number one concern, just like what you said, Mao, is that their condition and their ability to exist and be comfortable in the world is compromised by everybody else's activism from every side.
But yeah, and not only that, I wanted to tie it all right back into men's issues once again, because again, we have thoroughly spotted and seen what happens when very manipulative political ideologies try to do the same to men. When you get any political figure saying that you're not a man or a real man unless you do the X, Y, and Z or have such a belief. And this is very this is very prominent in the, what is it called, the
manosphere.
Yeah, but more likely there's a sect of the conservatives. I can't remember which one.
The
Tradcons, yeah. So the traditional conservatives, there is you can always spot them using that tactic. That and obviously it all boils down to a real man does whatever they tell them to do and such and so forth. And we always spot that as being
Right.
like dishonest and a political tactic, and we hope and we cross our fingers, hoping that men don't fall for such an obvious political trap. But we
Yeah.
do see like trans people falling for it, which
Yeah.
is very like scary, and it's such a shame.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, the good news is that it's starting to be much more publicly called out and dismissed than it was 5 years ago, which is good. But what because people can be so optimistic and so like naively positive. It's like, yes, this is starting to be put in its place, and it's starting to be called for what it is. But the point is, we still have a mess to clean up. There's still a lot of detritus and residual bad feeling and resentment to account for. And the good side of just being part of the what I call the genuine men's movement is, we never pulled that kind of crap, right?
Yeah.
We never designated what a real man or a real woman is or should be, or how they behave or whatever, and that's nice for us, but but at the same time, it puts us in the position of having to account for and having to take responsibility, for the actions of people, frankly, that we never agreed with, and sometimes, it's no big deal. We just come back with, that ain't us. That's, it was never, that was never our position, and we've got receipts, so it's not a big deal. But sometimes, especially in a one-on-one conversation, right? And I go through this experience even now, where I have to walk somebody through the difference between us, us few, and everything that they've been hearing about for the past, 7 or 8 years. Right. And some of these people have a vested interest, right? I'm thinking of a woman I know very well who's a dear friend, and she has a couple of sons, right? And it's like the parental instinct is to shield them from this bad thing, right? Which is probably good, but the sons are adults now, and there's no more shielding left, and she has to know, who to point to, right? Who really is this hypothetical good male role model, and it's like I say, whenever you break it down to somebody's individual situation, then it always gets really messy and really personal, and really anxious, and really frightening, scary, right? And it's like our movement, or our part of the movement, however you want to say it, is, whether we realize it or not, a big chunk of our responsibility, is to get regular people through that really scary stuff that has to do with their husband or their wife or their son or their daughter or their mom and dad, because that's something that's happening right next to them, and the environment that we're in, and all of the very visible activism has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with those conversations and those conflicts and those feelings, right? It really sucks. I mean, and I'm glad Tall Lady isn't here anymore, so she can't beat me up. But, I gotta say, 20, 25, maybe 30 years ago, my generation had a shot at preventing all this. We might have handled it differently enough as a group, as a demographic, that we wouldn't be having these kind of conversations now, but we missed that opportunity. Now we have this, right? And so, when I hear, and I do sometimes hear people in our movement saying, why is it always our mess to clean up? Well, it isn't necessarily a mess that we made, but we sure didn't do anything to prevent it.
I have questions about
it ain't what we did, it's what we didn't do.
Yeah. I have questions about solving some of these issues. I have ideas, and I'd like to get your thoughts if that's okay, guys.
Sure.
And the most obvious one, obviously, with the solving the toilet and changing room issue, would be to create trans only bathroom facilities and changing rooms. The question would be, how do you go about policing that to ensure that, for example, trans women aren't using toilets for biological women, particularly in public? And the only answer I can come up with is having some kind of ID card which can be checked to show that you are a trans person or trans woman in particular in this case. Now that has echoes of a certain time period in the 20th century. I don't know what you guys think. I don't know what you guys think.
Like, to be honest, I do have some criticisms of that idea. Mainly because, like, I don't know, like, you're just never going to convince, like, okay, so let's set up a scenario in which you have a trans, what is it called, a woman that transition into a man, and they have the trans cards. Let's say, for example, that you are in a very specific state within the United States, a state in which requires, like, the people go for their biological bathrooms. So you have this person that looks just like a man entering the woman's bathroom. Like, the women are just not gonna like it no matter what. And that trans man can be like, well, I have my card right here, it says biological woman, and I am required to go here. And they're gonna be like, well, but that's not what we wanted. That's not what we want. That's not what we liked. And to be honest, like, my entire solution would be to just it has to be, when it comes to people, have to be judged on appearance. So if someone, like, passes as a man, then they just go into the male bathroom, and if they pass as a woman, they go into, like, the female bathroom. The only people that are gonna be discriminated will be, like, the very ugly non-passing trans people, which to me, that's like the best compromise to be made, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not proposing this as any way as an actual solution, Mal. I am playing devil's advocate,
right,
in the most obvious kind of way,
right.
And
just spitballing, as it were.
Yeah. Les has heard me talk about this before, and he knows exactly where I'm going.
Yeah,
so I'll let you answer.
It's these are, and believe me, there's been a lot of this flying around lately, but all of it is predicated on an appeal to benign human nature. In other words, that once we get this set up and spend the money and allocate the resources, everybody will just go along with it. Now it doesn't take much, to disprove that, right? People don't do that, or at least not all people. Now, most people that is, they just want to get through their life, right? They don't want to cause trouble. And if there was an arrangement for, specific transgender facilities or identification, that most people would try to go along with it, and most people would try to accommodate it the best they can without, with no ill will, right? but it's always that percentage of people, like, if it was about ID cards, right? A large contingent of the contrary, percentage who doesn't want to go along with anything. They like disruption and chaos. Okay, among them, the ones who are transgender or transgender allied would jump right up and say, yeah, and the Jews had to wear little gold stars of David. This is this is eugenics, right? And then from the other side, they would say, ID or no ID, I don't want my little girl in a public bathroom with somebody who has male genitals, right? In other words, for everything that reasonable and positive people come up with as a solution, going to be somebody out there just waiting for it to happen so that they can game it and cause trouble. And it's like this, that I think is the issue, right?
Yeah.
Is addressing that variety of person, addressing and confronting that variety of person, figuring out a way, to get them not to cause that kind of trouble, while at the same time, by apathy or negligence, making sure that this supposedly ridiculous and like slippery slope that they're talking about doesn't actually come to pass. The other half of it is to say, to be able to demonstrate now and from now on that issuing an identification card to somebody, to everyone, and identifying transgender people, for example, is never going to have a negative side effect.
Which it is.
It will.
If you start singling out a particular group of people, it's only going to come off bad. There is no other way for it to go. History has shown that.
Yep.
We've alluded to it with my comment about the early of 20th century and what happened with the Jews. They were forced to carry around ID cards saying that they were Jewish.
Right.
And what happened? 6 million of them ended up being sent to the gas chambers.
Right.
And it's not beyond the realms of possibility. That is exactly what is going to happen again.
Right. Right.
In fact, it's almost a guarantee.
Yeah.
So
it's the nature of human nature that is at the root of all this. It's not that some people are ill-suited to the sex assignment they were born with. That's not the problem.
No.
You could say the same thing about the position of someone who is cisgendered, but they happen to be gay or queer in some way. It ain't them, right? It's the water that they swim in. It's either clean enough for them to like get along and have their life or not, right?
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that any individual, transgender or queer or gay or of color or immigrant or working class person has very little influence over, right? As just one person. They can't make changes to the environment that they're in that that are reliable, consistent, and easy to maintain. It takes constant effort. And we deal with that all the time. We're part of the men's advocacy. That means, right, that we're not like everybody else, right? And because of that, like I say, there's upkeep, there's maintenance work all the time, every day. Like I have to do extra because I have this life and I have this commitment, and for me, I can say I've never been queer or gay, except maybe, I don't know, in the most metaphysical way. I'm just an ordinary cisgendered straight dude, but because of the fact that, I have this history, right, that has nothing to do with my sexuality or very little to do with it. Same thing. I've got maintenance expenses and maintenance efforts. There's stuff I got to do, right? And I got to do it, because if I don't do it, then things go really bad really quick.
Yeah.
And some of it is about me. Some of it is about just these like limitations or disabilities, however you want to talk about it. And yeah, that's not the fault of the world, but probably a good 80% of it is because of the environment I'm in.
Yeah.
It just, that's the way it is. And the environment that I'm in is going to be the environment I'm in until well after I'm gone.
Yeah. To be serious, because obviously I was somewhat taking the mickey a little bit earlier on. There is no solution to this other than the trans activists have to back off without a shadow of a doubt. They need to lay off a little bit, because it's all well and good saying trans people deserve to be treated like a human. That should really go without saying. But unfortunately, it needs to be said. Same with black people, gay people, whatever terms you want to use. And the best way of doing that is to just treat everybody the same. Your sexuality, your gender identity, your skin color, none of that actually matters. I know I've just said that, but I'm going to say this as well. I'm a heterosexual fat white bloke who lives in South Wales and grew up in the southeast of Kent in the UK. And it doesn't matter. It is completely irrelevant to the skill sets that I have and the things that I can do and the beliefs that I have and the thoughts that run through my head. None of that actually matters. And that's the biggest solution to most of society's issues, if I'm brutally honest, is to understand that none of this shit actually fucking matters.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's it. And, you had mentioned that the activists in supposed support of transgender people, need to go dark, right? And just shut down. And, the same could be said for the other side of that coin on the traditional conservative side, to just stop talking about it like right now. Because if you don't, these people that we finally got calmed down are going to jump right back up with a vengeance. Because this again is how people are, and somebody will be there to make a buck on it. And like I say, that's all academic at this point, because what we're talking about is not happening right now. Everybody is up in arms about it. And so, the genuine question of, is the social order that we've cobbled together, is it going to come up with any solutions? Is it going to mutate and transform to the point where this is not an issue anymore someday? Like I said, and that's on everybody. That's a collective responsibility if ever there was one. And for the people, and this is mostly on the conservative side, who always default and appeal to biology, right? And say that, and just assert that anything other than, their view of people's sex life and their presentation, anything other than that, other than what they say is okay, is just an aberration and an abomination before God or whatever, however they're putting it. It's like, we don't live and we don't go through our life in accordance with our biology anymore. We really haven't since we learned how to grow our own food.
Light fires.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I don't run the script that was predetermined for me, because I take medication, wear glasses, go to the doctor, all of that stuff. We don't live that way, right? And we're not. If there's been any evolution, our evolution has been away from even being able to live that way. We can't do it anymore. We don't have heavy guard hairs. We don't have dense bones and dense connective tissue and muscle tissue. We don't have like high-speed reflexes. We don't have none of that crap. Long, sharp teeth and heavy claws. Like fleet-footedness. We don't have that. We have brains. That's what we have. And to say that this is just a condition of our biology, then, like I said, we're condemned to extinction if that's the plan. We're just not going to make it. We're not set up that way anymore.
And I could sit here and probably make the argument that transgender or genuine transgenderism shows that Mother Nature can get it wrong from time to time. And as we've pointed out, there are trans people who, post-transition, you can see the mistake that Mother Nature made with them.
Well,
and I go back to Blair White.
Yeah.
Love or hate her politics. Right. At the end of the day, objectively, you look at Blair White and you go, she was always supposed to be a woman.
Right.
Mother Nature got that one wrong.
Right. And even that like limits the assessment to whether or not somebody like Blair White is gonna is going to satisfy her genes by making more of them in the normal way, which she's not going to do, right? It's just not going to be like that, right?
No.
But the good news is, and I hate to be such a grouchy old man, there's too many people already. There's 8,000 million people on Earth breathing air and eating and pooping while we're sitting here. That's too many, and whenever I hear about somebody, whether they're coming out as gay or queer or transgender, whatever, I'm like, well, that's one less ripple in the pond, in a pond that's already nothing but ripples.
Yeah.
I just better, it's like at some point our alternatives are either, let this happen by Mother Nature's hand, or we start, sitting down and figuring out who should live and who should die. I don't want that job.
Yeah. I just want to say something about, being gay and what have you, or homosexual, however you want to term it. The number of times you read about so-and-so in the famous person who's come out as being gay or what have you, I just think, I don't give a shit. I had a conversation, right, with my ex-wife about my daughter's horse riding instructor, who happens to be a gay man. And I simply turned around to her and said, does him being gay alter his ability to teach our daughter how to ride a horse safely? And my ex-wife's answer was, well, no. Exactly. So what the fuck does it matter? None. Sexual identity and all of that stuff and sexuality is unimportant. It's I hate to go all Martin Luther King because whatever, but it is literally the person, the content of their character, and that is really at the crux of the of any issue that we can think of.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. The irony is that, too many people care about those elements of a person before they, know them well enough or care about them enough to want them to be happy. Right. Now, like I said, I've had a lot of people come out to me, and I always did my best to make sure that they didn't come out to me until after they knew for sure that I knew them and that I cared about them and that I wanted for them to be happy.
Yeah.
Because then, whatever like connection that I have with that person, it's going to be predicated on the idea that I want what's good for them and they want what's good for me.
And that you like, and not even that you like them, you just respect them as a human being.
Exactly.
You don't have to necessarily like them,
exactly,
or want to hang around with them and all this stuff. And
I've had-
I'm sorry if somebody come out to me. I mean, obviously my daughter has done so. My response would be, "And
yeah.
are you telling me that you fancy me? Is that where you're? If it was a guy,
Yeah.
Are you telling me you're physically attracted to me? Well, I'm flattered and all that, but I'm sorry, I'm not that way inclined, thank you.
Right.
And I've had that happen in a pub. I used to look. I had gay guys come on to me left, right, and centre. Look, guys, very flattered, thank you very much, but I'm really not interested.
Right.
I like women. I'm sorry, it's just the way I am. It's just how I'm wired. You're wired differently to me. Let's just, there's your beer. Go and sit down and hang out and do whatever it is you do.
Right. To be there, to be able to say I'm here for the beer,
Yeah.
And mean it. And it's weird because I've had people who have come out to me, it was by not on purpose, like not intentional.
Yeah.
And they would discover that I didn't know that about them before that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they, it was like, well, didn't you know? And I said, well, I never asked, and then it's like, well, yeah, why didn't you ask?
Don't care.
Well, not only that, but I want that. I want for that to come from you. That item of your life belongs to you, and me intruding on you to ask and to and put that pressure on you is, it's not quite a theft, but it's not honest. It's not how you would say it. It's not how to have somebody give themselves to you, right? I don't. That's the thing. In my little life and all of my travels and travails, I've discovered that taking things from people always makes me regret it. Like deeply regret it.
As it should.
But right. And I've also found that whenever people give me things, whether it's something like that or something physical, then all of a sudden I don't regret it. I'm happy about it. Right. I'm more inclined to give something back.
Yeah.
And, end of the day, it's got a value to it. Not only is this a thing you gave me, whether it's a fact about yourself or, something that you wanted, some item you wanted to give me. Not only that, but, that it came from you, right? That it was something you wanted me to have. Right. And, where's the regret there? I mean, even, I've been given things that, I don't, to be honest with you, I don't have that much use for, but, it came from a place in them that wanted me to have it. And that means as much as, as anything else. And honestly, again, in the cold light of day, when we're just sitting here hashing all this out, that makes perfect sense. And it's like, okay, yeah, that sounds right. I mean, of course, but look at people's, I guess, proclivity or characteristic of wanting to take from, and if it's something like, the truth about their sexuality, right? That's not something you want to take from somebody. That's not something that you want to, coerce them or pressure them into giving up. Right? Because if you do, for one thing, you won't be able to do anything good with it. For another thing, if you're an honorable person at all, you're going to have to keep it to yourself, right? It's another secret to keep, and finally, like I said, at best, it's nothing but upkeep, and it won't help that person, have a better life. So, well, now this person, knows that I'm gay or transgender or whatever. So now what?
Yeah. Well, I suppose for the person giving you that information, it's a burden off their mind, I guess. Yeah, that they have told somebody that they are close to that they are this way inclined. But I really do think the best response can be, and why, I appreciate you wanting to tell me this fact about yourself, but it's not going to change my mind about you.
Yeah. So, genuine acceptance, it's like, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Now,
okay, you're
let's
gay.
go to lunch,
let's go have a beer
because I'm hungry.
Yeah.
You're gay, I'm hungry. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. I've only had an encounter with one trans person, and that was at work. And she was far stronger than I'd ever bloody be. I was out by Heathrow Airport, and I had to get a sheet from the basket underneath one of the trailers, flatbed trailer. And I could not lift this thing out for love nor bleeding money. She's come along, grabbed hold of it, and just launched it out from underneath the trailer. It was quite funny, actually. I was getting the mickey taken. I think part of that though is down to the fact that I'm quite secure in who I am.
Right.
I'm not being humble when I say that, because obviously we've discussed humility before, and as soon as you say you've got humility, you don't have it. So I'm not being humble when I say I'm comfortable enough in my own skin where I can accept help of a trans woman to do something heavy.
Sure. And sometimes when I talk to especially men, who they do come off like they're insensitive. This is kind of an irony, and kind of a tragedy too, is that they're really not.
Yeah.
They really are sensitive and empathetic, to, for example, a situation like that. But between all of the conditioning that they've gotten, not to show that empathy, and also, that they aren't necessarily aware that sometimes that empathy and sometimes that, sense of security has to be displayed, and that's not easy. Like what you just did just there, to just display the fact that, hey, I'm comfortable enough in my skin that this doesn't bother me. This is not an uncomfortable event for me. Right? So that's, like I say, that's kind of another mess to clean up. That's another issue to address, and it goes back to, it goes back to the, I guess, condition of most men not having enough avenues, to talk that way. I mean, you need to count yourself lucky because, you have a place to be able to do that, here. Right. And, it might not play out the same way in other discussions. But there's always this nagging feeling like, well, it should be okay. you
Yeah.
know. And then you know, get like me, you start getting like grouchy about it. You know?
I hate to
But
break the bad news to you. I'm already grouchy. I'm not even 41 yet.
well, we've been at this for a good while, and I
Yeah.
guess we ought to wrap it up. You know what, Mao, we haven't heard from you in a minute. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
So when it comes to the general topic of like trans issues, like you got the normal like human problems of like people having like a mismatch of the you know the brain not recognizing the rest of the body as their own, you know, um, which is some people say it's like a neurological issue or a body issue. And you know, right now, like people transition, they do like the surgeries. We hope that someday we can get like some sort of like treatment to like make them feel perfectly okay with like the sex they were born in. But until now, like yeah, they're struggling with that until then. Then we have the social issues we have which have to deal with like again the validation, recognizing like transgenderism as an issue worth fighting for, um or the compromises that we need to make between like the people that have that problem and the people that don't. We also touch upon like I heard Mike's talking about the trans people in sports, and I didn't give my take at that time, but I think that we should. The best compromise would be like to have the segregated spaces, like the the women's sports and the men's sports, and then we could have like a free for all, and then like the trans people could just join in and participate there. So like nobody gets excluded, but you know, at the same time, everyone has their own space. So that'd be pretty cool. So we do see a lot of problems, like the typical biological problem and the neurological problem and the social aspects. But like as long as people wanna like get get along, you know, there's always like a compromise that can be made to so everybody can get something out of it. Because unfortunately, right now, what we do see is a lot of political ideologies jumping in to capitalize on the existence of trans people, so they can gain more acolytes, you know. And then we see the inverse, the people that use them as a new boogeyman to grow their own like political affiliation, which it's pretty annoying. But at the end of the day, like it's just better to allow the trans people to let them know that they're being played in a game, and yeah, they have the right to play into it if they want. They can be puppets if they want to, um, or maybe they will choose not to. But in my opinion, it's better to just inform them that this is what's happening. So yeah, that would be like my summarization and my opinions.
All right. Thank you. And Dead Duck?
Oh God, how am I going to sum this up? On the serious note, I can't see any easy solution to these issues in terms of the societal discussions that are going on at the moment. Obviously, treating people as humans is kind of key to the whole thing. What we do about the peripheral smoke and mirror stuff is a more complicated question. You know, obviously I've used a little bit of humour today, a couple of swear words as well, but that's the way I think. I honestly just do not care about how people choose to lead their individual lives. Obviously, you know, we've had a pretty heavy discussion about trans children, and that is something I do have strong opinions on. I don't think we should be transitioning children at all. I think that's a one-way ticket straight to a very dark place that nobody wants to go and nobody should be trying to get to. But ultimately, there is no going back. Now, the bottle has been uncorked, and we've got to try and try to make things better than they are, whilst also respecting society as it has been. You know, the misandry within the conversation needs to go away, and you know, there's an awful lot of irony in the current discussions as well. That also needs to go away. There's no place for it. This is far too serious a matter to deal with. So yeah, treat people like human beings. You'll find it goes an awfully long way.
Well put. I guess I would only add, as I frequently do, that if you want to get to the root cause of this, whether it's the plight of the transgender person, the queer person, the gay person, the person of color, the person who is not the same sex as you by whatever means, the person who is of a different class than you, then the overall environment, that any of those people are in, which, let's be honest about it, among all of those categories, that's like almost everybody anyway. But what has to happen is not only, burying the hatchet and getting serious about, what to do going forward, but things that, like I said, when sitting there just talking about it, it sounds so easy, to be forgiving and tolerant, open-minded, patient, forbearing, courageous, honorable. In the heat of battle, when you feel like your tribe is being attacked, right? Having those at hand is very difficult. But as I've said so many times, the things that we have operated on for thousands of years, that we've managed to survive with and we've managed to make progress with, those things are no longer useful, right? And, when you look around and say, well, can't use that stuff anymore, what can we use? And like I said, those virtues were invented by people for a reason, and people existed before those virtues were even, on the table at all, which, we survived, but all of life for almost everybody was miserable and short and brutish and solitary and dark and frightening. And as I tell people, at least for a while, we can go back to that. We can go back to that time, right? But for one thing, I don't think we're designed to, exist that way for very long. And for another thing, why should we want to? When there are, difficult and costly alternatives, but at least we have a track record proving that they work. When all else fails, be honest, be open-minded, be empathetic, be kind, be loving, be honorable, be loyal, but if it comes to it, do those things after you've tried everything else and, it all failed, because then you will know the difference between what works and what doesn't. Anyway, thank you all for being here, and thanks everyone listening for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Thank you for coming.